Hey there, Around the Layout listeners. With advanced previews of upcoming episodes and monthly giveaways, now's the time to become an Operating Crew member. For just $3 a month, you'll get an exclusive membership sticker, your name listed on the Operating Crew roster, and automatic entry into our monthly giveaway drawings. Just as important, your financial support keeps all of our episodes from behind paywalls and free of those annoying car insurance commercials you hear on other podcasts. Joining the Operating Crew is quick and easy. Head to patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. And if you missed that, you'll find a link on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And thank you for being a listener. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me on this episode, coming to us from San Jose, California, John Abatecola. John, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, John. We got to meet as we were putting together the TSG Talking Trains Live. Is that what TSG Talking Trains Live?
TSG Live Talking. It's this. Talking Trains.
Okay. TSG Live Talking Trains. And we had a blast as we had fellow podcasters, Andy Dorsch and Tom Gasior on the show. And
Tony Cook.
Hosted by Tony Cook, co-hosted by Tony Cook and hosted by yourself. And boy, did we have an absolute blast talking podcasts and everything else. It was a great time. And I really appreciate you having all of us there.
Well, I appreciate your help in putting it all together too. That was one of the best Talking Trains episodes I think that I've ever been a part of. So thank you for putting us all together.
Well, you kind of invited a little bit of trouble when you put all those podcasters together, and Tony being a former radio guy, you certainly didn't have any shortage of guys that wanted to talk. So we were definitely in the right venue for it. But I guess more important to the idea of the show was just so really cool. I mean, you can talk about fellowship, but you actually got to put it into motion. And we were able to do that. Not only are we talking about two hobbies, we're talking about the hobby of model railroading, of course, but also the hobby of podcasting, because it's really the hobby within the hobby. And I know you're into that too, with your own podcast. And it's just so great to be able to be in that space. And then you have all these multiple choices of what to listen to. But ultimately, we just want everybody to listen to everything and be in the podcasting space and be able to enjoy it.
Sure. Do you know what I thought was really good about that show, Ray? Was the fact that all the people who were there wanted to be there, number one, and number two, wanted the other people to be there. Like we were all friends, even though we've never met each other. And I think that's one of the really cool things about this space that we occupy.
Yeah, and I think it's the best of both worlds of the spirit of model railroading bleeding through into the model railroading podcasts, and greatest people in the greatest hobby there is, and it certainly was represented very well in that group. So again, thank you for having us. It was a lot of fun talking about podcasts and how we all work together, and it's great to now have you on the show and to get to know you as a modeler and your journey through the hobby. So I'm looking forward to that. And then we'll talk about some of the projects that you've done and how you've worked up to your podcast, and then the live talking trains, and of course your layout videos, which I really enjoy. And I've seen a few of them. I've actually done research for guests using them. So really looking forward to talking to you about that. But first, I want to get to know your model railroading journey. We'll start in the beginning like we always do. Tell me, John, how did you get started in the model railroading hobby?
Well, actually, you have to go back a long time, 50 some odd years. When I was 2 years old, my parents put a train on my birthday cake. And my birthday, as you know, is in November, because that's when the day of the Talking Trains show last month was November 15th. And that same year, I got this. It was probably only about this big, but to a 2-year-old, it felt like it was really big. It was like this metal locomotive that went around on the kitchen floor, with batteries in it and stuff.
Right.
And so they got me started early on with really liking trains. And it was a number of years later, I was about 8 or 9 years old when my parents went to Italy. In case you're wondering, the last name, Abatecola, is Italian. I'm 100% Italian. So they went to Italy, and my dad has family, or had family. I guess they still do, but have family that work on the trains in Italy.
Oh, wow.
And right. So he told them about me, and they gave him a bunch of electric trains to take home for me. So I got my first, I guess, electric train sets from Italy. And the following year, or maybe it was the same year, I really don't remember. It was so long ago, but I got like a Tyco, from the Sears catalog, that, because, the Italian trains don't look like this train that's behind me here. Right.
Right.
They look totally different. And so the Tyco looked more like this, and that's what I wanted. So I ended up with a Tyco set. So I guess that's kind of the real start. You have to skip ahead some more years to be more current with it, because I got out of trains for a number of years, probably 10 years at least, maybe 15 years. And then back in the early 2000s, I got back into it because I started making videos about trains. And that's also a strange story. I don't know if you want to hear that.
Yeah, we do want to hear that. Let's add a little color here, though, because I got to remind this video guy that we're doing an audio podcast. Tell us about the locomotives that you've got in your background there, because I'm sure that's a photo that you took.
It is, actually. Yeah. This was in Watsonville a couple months ago, and it's actually a frame grab off of a 4K video I shot on my phone, of all things. Nice. And does that look like a phone picture to you? I mean, these iPhones these iPhones are pretty amazing. And that's all I had. And we saw this local getting ready to leave out of Watsonville. We had just gone to Watsonville for an op session at a friend's layout. And the guys that I rode down there with are like, hey, you want to go over to the yard and see if anything's happening? This is on a Saturday. And I'm thinking to myself, there's not going to be, they don't run stuff on Saturday out of Watsonville. Little did I know. Lo and behold, we get there and this guy's getting ready to take off. So we foamed it, as I call it, and, did some rail fanning after an op session. It couldn't get much better than that.
No, that's for sure. And what do you got there? You got a Union Pacific trailer, and then the leader is a patched UP, but it's a former Cotton Belt locomotive. So that's pretty sweet. Great catch, and good thing you went over there on that Saturday. I bet you really happy. So
yeah.
So let's get back to this timeline. So you as a kid, you're getting all these locomotives. And of course, I'm obligated to ask the Tony Cook question. Do you still have any of your trains from when you were a kid?
I do. Matter of fact, I'm going to be talking to Tony again this month on the Talking Trains show, and we're going to be talking about train sets. I realize when this comes out, it may not be relevant to people. I don't know how soon you're going to have this out, but so anyway, I have all of that stuff, and it's not in very good shape anymore, but it has survived, and I have all of it.
That's awesome that you have it. And I have mine when I was a kid too, and it's always great, and it doesn't run. It's a Tyco, but it's always just great to be able to have those childhood memories. And I think maybe that helped me restart. And you had a restart after, you said, 10 years of being out of the hobby. Do you remember what sparked it? Do you remember the moment for you that kind of rekindled the fire of model railroading, or even railroading in general?
Well, I think it came around late 2004. We have at my house, or had, I should say, basically a fall party, if you want to call it that. It's like a get together where we'd invite 20 or 30 people over, because, all the holidays are there. Every birthday in my family's after October 27th, including mine, as you know. And so we had a bunch of friends over, and at the time I was kind of looking for a project. I wanted to do a documentary, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do it about. And one of the guests at the party, who was a friend at the time, said, you ought to do videos about trains. And I thought, oh, well, that's kind of cool. I like trains. And I ended up recruiting that person to help. And this is the first ever, I just happen to have this here. It's the first ever test print of the first ever train video I made. It's Caltrain 2005. Caltrain is our local commute here.
Yep.
And we decided to do Caltrain because, well, commute trains run on a schedule. And if you're filming something or, trying to plan something, a schedule is really helpful. So, so we did that video together, and, getting back into trains by making videos. That one was followed shortly after by another one about a commute train that runs from Stockton. I don't know if you're familiar with our geography here. It's about 90 miles away or something like that, 75, 90 miles, depending where you are in San Jose.
Okay.
And we did a video about ACE, Altamont. At the time, it was the Altamont Commuter Express. Now they call it the Altamont Corridor Express.
Okay.
And, it just kind of grew from there. And so I was mostly doing prototype videos that were DVDs. I mean, we're talking 2005 to about 2013. That's kind of the range that I'm talking about right now. And at some point in that process, the person that I was shooting the train videos with also happens to be a modeler, and a very good modeler when it comes to working on plastic models. Mm-hmm. So at some point, we're just like, hey, why don't we make some modeling videos? So we did those too. And I did a monster sort of 3-year project for YouTube that was super detailing I think it was started off as an Athearn Blue Box or something like that. And by the time the thing was done, it looked like a super detailed, brass engine, because he had every detail kit from Details West and all these other places that you can, that you can find this. Yeah. And it turned into a really amazing project that inspired a lot of people. I realize I'm kind of going in the weeds here. So
no, you're not in the weeds at all, because I mean, this is really kind of a neat. I'm just curious. So you're at this party, and this idea mentioned that you do a documentary on trains. I would only guess that you have some prior video experience up to this point. What were you doing prior to shooting train documentaries that kind of led you to that path?
Everything. So I started TSG Multimedia in 1998. Actually, it's been around 25 years now. I don't ever think about that, but that's a long time.
It is. You started it when I got out of high school. So yeah, it's been a while for sure. So not to date you or anything, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting old, I guess. But, I started it, and at the time, the .com business was really booming in Silicon Valley. That's where I live. And I had friends that worked at places like, there was a place called Netscape. Do you remember Netscape?
I remember Netscape, yeah.
Right? They had a web browser. I did all kinds of work for Netscape. That was video work. I did a bunch of work for a company called Varian that makes the machines for treating cancer.
Wow.
Did a lot of work for, Oracle is out here. They're still around. I don't know what they do anymore, but they're still around.
Yep.
Sun Microsystems isn't around anymore. I don't know who bought them or what happened to them, but I did work for them. So I did all kinds of video work. I did also weddings, parties, funerals. Don't do a funeral. It's very depressing.
Oof.
I filmed this. It's one of my funnier stories. It was a guy who was only 53 or something years old, like a tow truck driver or something, just dropped dead one night on the kitchen floor. Got up to get a drink or something and didn't make it back to bed.
Yikes!
It was this guy's funeral, and the lady called me up. His widow called me up, and she just wanted me to film this funeral. And I'm like, whatever. I mean, as long as they're paying, I'll film whatever. And I went and filmed this funeral, and I was depressed for like 3 days after that. And I laugh about it now because, I mean, it's just weird. I didn't even know the guy, but I was really sad for a few days.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like a memory you would want to watch. Like, oh, let's pull out that funeral video and let's give it a watch. And it doesn't seem like you'd want to relive it. Ooh.
It did seem kind of strange at the time. But I think the story there, Ray, was that the widow and this guy had just had a daughter, and she was not even a year old yet. I mean, part of what really hit me here was as the casket was lowering into the ground, the baby started waving. She was holding the baby, and the baby started waving. And I was like, oh no, that's horrible.
No, you've got this on film, and oh boy. Yeah, no wonder why you wanted to go document something else that's fun. You got to get away from that and get some fun stuff. And yeah, so that kind of makes sense. But so you have a video background. Some of it maybe not so spectacular, but you have a video background, and now you're out shooting trains. In that time, you talked about when you were a kid, and then you obviously the restart in the documentary. Were trains in your life at all? Did you, or was it just kind of a forgotten thing? Were you able to at least rail fan? Were you at least alert to it, or was it just kind of numb to you?
After about 1980 or maybe 82, I really got hardcore into music. Okay. And I got a drum set it was in 1984. I got a drum set, and I was going to be the next rock star. Yep. I mean, I was convinced that was going to happen. And that lasted until about 1992 or 94 or something like that, when I finally woke up from that pipe dream. So to answer the question, trains were not even on my radar for a good 10 or 15 years until I started doing the documentaries. Yeah. So, but as a kid, I was really into it, though. Not into it like I could tell you what the locomotives were or even what was carried in the cars, but into it as in, these things are cool. I mean, we would go as a kid. I remember going over railroad crossings, and I would look both directions to see if I could see a light, a headlight down there. And if there was a headlight, I don't know if I would beg, but I would ask my parents to turn around so that we could watch the train go by, and they would. Right. And another really funny story, Ray, if you don't mind me telling it.
Go ahead.
I was in 4th grade. So this was about 1977 or something like that. And there was a railroad that went right past the school. I went to school out in the country, and something called the Stockton Terminal in Eastern had a local that it ran out to the town where I went to school. And you could totally hear it. The horn, they have the grade crossing there, so you could hear the horn. Yep. And somehow, I don't know what it was, but somehow I'd convinced my 4th grade teacher to let me out of class to go watch the train go by, and she would.
Nice.
So I don't know what the other kids thought, but if I had been in that class as a normal kid, I would have thought there's something wrong with that guy.
I guess I'm trying to imagine if I was that 4th grader, I probably have bad marks, so I'd be distracted all the time waiting for it. And I guess maybe I'm still a bad student, because even today I was at work, and down in Pennsylvania, I mentioned it on the episode with Joe Mammy. There's a switching area called the CNF. Norfolk Southern runs it, and I'm in the building counting inventory, and I could hear them going through the crossings, and it's like, oh, I got to count again. 1, 2, 3, and then I hear them again. 1, 2, 3. So I was a bad student today too, but I can only imagine a 4th grader. But that's awesome. Your teacher supported that, and look at that. It worked out well for you. It became a really great hobby for you. And obviously part of the TSG Multimedia growth is adding that train documentary stuff. So Caltrains comes out on DVD. Tell me about that. How do you take that to market? I mean, you obviously, Silicon Valley, of course, you're going to have a website to sell it on. But tell us about, that process of selling that first DVD.
It's interesting because coming out of a video background, if people want to make videos nowadays, I think, everyone's carrying a 4K camera on their phone. We still didn't have that in 2005. So I was shooting standard definition with what we call prosumer cameras.
Yep.
And coming from the video background, I contacted Caltrain, and I told them, I want to make a video about Caltrain. And I don't think they really understood what I meant, because they sent me some form letter about insurance and how much it costs to be on the car and lights and electricity and all this stuff. I'm like, no. I don't want to make a drama on the train. I want to make a video about the train,
right.
Having it from the outside, not from the inside. And finally, I ended up talking to someone who understood what I was doing. And I had basically a letter that said where I was going to be. And we have permission to be there. And they know we're there and it's no problem. Let them film the trains from the platform.
Right.
And so every week before I went out, I had my contact there, sign the one that was appropriate for that week. And I would have a printed copy in case we got hassled, right? Because it was still fairly soon after the whole 9/11 thing happened. And so people were very paranoid about infrastructure and stuff like that. So I thought it would make a lot more sense to have permission and have a letter. And I think I only ended up having to use it once or maybe twice the whole time that I filmed, which is pretty good because I think we covered something like 15 stations out of the 20 some odd stations that they run between. Yeah. And there was one guy that I think it was a sheriff's department in one of the more affluent areas in the Bay Area. Guess didn't have anything to do that day. So once I explained what we were doing, he's like, oh yeah. Then he started talking to me about GP9s going over to Hatchapee or something. Like, oh, this guy must be a real fan.
Nice. Maybe he was just looking for an excuse to talk to somebody and had to engage in a conversation, but
could be.
Yeah, from my experience, for the most part, you find that most folks are pretty good about it. And most rail crews, if you're respectful and of course, the golden rules of rail fanning, staying out of the gauge, staying out of their way, let them do their job, stay safe, and all those things that we practice certainly do help. But it was also a great idea that you reached out to the railroad to let them know you were doing this. So kudos to you for doing that.
Yeah. And that really is a video production thing. Like, you need to have permission no matter where you are, unless you own the property. You need permission from whoever does own the property to be there. Now, filming from a train platform, it's public kind of, but not really. So there's a gray area. So I just, not knowing any different or thinking that I didn't have to, I got permission. And I'm glad that I did, because I actually got to meet people at Caltrain. And one of the people I met helped when it came time to do the ACE video, which was the second one. He actually sent a great letter to them, to ACE, telling them, who I was and what I was trying to do. And we did the same thing with ACE, got permission and told them where I was going to be. So, and it turned out that the person was he ended up being a really, I want to say a fan, but I don't want to make it sound, he understood and he appreciated what we were doing, because he was a guy who was in marketing, and he actually worked for the Western Pacific on California Zephyr marketing. That's how he's gone now. But just a really great guy. His name was Art Lloyd, and he was really encouraging and helpful when it came to, getting these things going. And you asked about, bringing something to market. And there is a lot of work when it comes to a production like that. And I think a lot of people don't really understand how much work it is, because, you don't just shoot something and throw it together. It had to be edited, painstakingly edited. And there was so much footage. I mean, we were using mini DV tapes, which are these little things about this big.
Yep.
And I have like 15 or 20 of them sitting in a cabinet next to me here. That's that project. I don't know about hundreds, but at least dozens of hours of footage.
Yeah.
That, you don't use most of it. You use only the best stuff. And some stuff that's really good gets cut out, because you don't want to have something that's 4 hours long, because no one will watch 4 hours of Caltrain.
Right.
So there's all that. Then you have to burn the disc, and you have to author the disc. I don't know if you know about that, but it's a pretty painstaking, really detail-oriented process. And then you got to copyright everything.
Right.
So I had to send a copy out to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and, get the copyright form back before I published it. And so there was a lot. And I don't think a lot of people really understand how much goes into something like that.
Yeah. Was that your first, you talked about some of the things that you did prior, weddings and the unfortunate funeral and some other things that you had shot. Was this really kind of your first shot at doing something like in this commercial avenue where you were selling it like a DVD out to the public?
I think so. Yeah.
It must have been a major learning curve for you. Like you said, all these things and all at once. And I've done a little bit of video work, and in high school shot a documentary, and in the fire department, I did a little documentary. And I know that painstaking process. You got to shoot so many hours of video just to get minutes onto the project. It's just amazing. So I can imagine that big stack of tapes that you got.
Yeah. It's interesting. It wasn't much of a learning curve because I did formalize my education with video production.
Okay.
So I did know all the processes, and I know what it's all called and who you have to, I know you have which form to fill out for copyright and all that stuff. One of the things I've had people, this is kind of it's related, but it's kind of off topic. But one of the things I always do, always on YouTube, on my videos, is I have a watermark. You see this TSG that's above my head and behind me there, opposite the locomotive? Right. That goes in the bottom right corner of every single video.
Yeah.
After a certain time, because content thieves would steal stuff. And I'm very keenly aware of copyright and intellectual property. And I'm very protective of my work because it's work. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
And it represents a lot of time, and commitment to making it happen. So ever since I put, here's a tip for any YouTubers out there. Ever since I put that watermark on, I had very few content thefts.
Nice.
So, yep. So it works. I hate to have to do it. And I've had people complain, take the big TSG off the screen. It's like, sorry, content thieves ruined it for you all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's getting people to understand what intellectual property is very challenging at times. And I've had a few things that were used without my permission. Photography. I had a photo published without my permission. And, and then, some art that I had created used without permission. And it's so hard to get people to understand. It's like, what are you so upset about? Because it's this, they're using it. It's like, yeah, well, as much as it may be, the supposed honor that they chose my stuff, they're also trying to take credit for it too. It's like, or not give credit for it. And it's so hard to understand that whole thing, when to an outsider to explain it, it's just difficult at times.
Well, I've been approached by certain places that will remain nameless that wanted to use footage of mine on a video that they were going to release for sale. And I said, okay, well, let's figure out how much you want to pay for the shots. No problem. And as soon as we started talking about charging for it, they became less interested. I think that they expected me to go, oh my God, this big company wants to use my footage. It should be great exposure or whatever. It's like, no, you're going to use it to make money. And it's only fair that you should share some of that with the person, that provided the content for it.
Yeah. Funny. I can't deposit exposure at the bank, and I certainly can't pay any bills with it. And it's funny. It's good at times, to get exposure. You're in different places, but it's gotta be a mutual benefit. And if it's just something that's just to ride on, it makes it tough. But that's the creative space that you're in. And I think we're all in, when we talk about podcasting and, video production and YouTube channels. So you give some really good advice to those that are coming up in the YouTube stuff. Protect your work, because it does have some value, and you should get credit for it. And you should be able to, do what you wish. If you choose to monetize it, that's your choice and what you want to do. So some really good advice for the YouTubers out there. But you weren't editing like they were in 2005. Imagine with those mini DV tapes and whatnot. There must have been some old school methods as compared to today.
Oh yeah, the workflow is so much better with these guys right here.
Oh yes, yep. The good SD cards for sure. Yep.
I love these things. I went HD in I think 2010 or 2011. I waited for a while because it was just so prohibitively expensive when it first came out to do HD. And anyway, I had an HD, actually 2 HD cameras that used mini DV HD tapes.
Okay.
I don't think you can even find something that'll play these things now.
Right.
But a friend of mine about a year later got it was called a Canon XA10.
Yep.
And this was a card recording, a camera that recorded onto cards.
Right.
And I'm like, I saw the workflow and I'm like, you mean I don't have to wait for the tape to play while the computer's ingesting all the footage?
Right.
Wow. That sounds like a great way to do things. So I got rid of those HD mini DV cameras pretty quickly and got some Canon XA10s and they processed the color a lot better anyway, but the workflow is what I was after. And boy, that was one of the best decisions I ever made.
Yeah, kind of the steam to diesel version of video shooting, right? Just a whole new world. And that's one of the things that, I don't do a whole lot of video editing anymore. I just dabble a little bit and trying to get that ratio down. I mean, even in audio podcasting, audio editing, I find that it's like a 3-to-1 or sometimes 4-to-1 ratio. Like for every hour of podcast, there's about 3 to 4 hours of editing. And I'm sure there's a bigger ratio in video to try to get everything cleaned up. But I'm sure, if you're planning well, it shortens it up. But I'm sure there's a lot behind the scenes to get, production out there.
Yeah. One of the things that's very frustrating, and I think it's frustrating for people that want to do videos with me also, is unless it's a live thing, like the Talking Trains show, we just talk ahead of time like we did, kind of get to know each other and everybody understands it's a safe space for all of us and all that. But when it comes to trying to do a video production, if you're not prepared, I don't even want to do it. And I don't mean that to sound cruel or unkind or anything, but I'm telling you, if I have done videos with a prepared person and I've done videos with unprepared people, and the only ones I want to do are the ones that are prepared.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, there's a guy out here. You probably know the name. His name is Jack Burgess.
Yes.
He does, right? He has the Yosemite Valley Railroad, and it is one of the premier model railroads probably in the entire world. Anyway, great guy. I did probably 28 or 30 videos with him. That was a series called Model Railroad with Jack Burgess. And that guy, I would show up and he would have his papers of everything he was going to talk about with the pictures on the papers. He'd printed me a copy. He hands me a disc and says, all the photos you need are on here that I'm going to talk about. And they're numbered and it's referred to on this paper. And I'm like, wow, where did this guy come from? Why doesn't everybody do this? So it's like, I still have most of what he presented to me when I would go to shoot videos in my file cabinet here, because it's just like, I'm going to keep this stuff because it's just, I mean, Jack's kind of a legend anyway, just because so many people know him from all of his articles and his ridiculously inspirational modeling. But he's also a good friend. And I just love the fact that he was one of those guys that was ultra prepared. And there's been now probably half a dozen layout tour videos that the people were as prepared as Jack. So it does happen.
It does. Well, I think model railroaders in general are good planners. I mean, when you have a great layout, you've had to put together a plan. And I think that they know how to put together a plan and then execute it. And I'm sure it goes beyond just the model railroad and probably into a lot of parts of their life too. Let's go back to Jack for a few minutes here. And how did you get hooked up with him, and where did you decide to do this? How did this project come to light?
Well, it's kind of a fun story. So a friend of mine so I'm trying to remember how it all started. So as these were coming out, I would get emails from people. And a lot of times they were kids, teenagers. They're like, oh my God, I love your videos. They're so fun. And I've had an email address website that you can always get a hold of me. I'm real easy to find, especially online. So a guy named Mike Ninneman, who's also a friend now, I've been friends with him for probably 10 years now. He knew Jack, and I'm not sure how he knew Jack, because at the time he was only about 16 years old, maybe. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I guess it goes to show that Jack is very open with inviting people to his house to see his layout and being super helpful and nice to people. But anyway, Mike introduced me to Jack, and I had done, I think maybe half a dozen or maybe 10 layout tour videos up to that point. And it wasn't, normally when someone had a layout, I'd get a hold of them or they'd get a hold of me and I'd just come over and we would just shoot it. It wasn't like that with Jack. He's like, yeah, come on over. But I don't operate my layout. So because I don't like cleaning track, and I get to know him more, and I'll explain that later if you like.
Yeah.
But he's just like, come on over and take a look at the layout and you'll get an idea of what it is. So I went over there and met him, and, super nice guy. He spent probably an hour and a half showing me the layout. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, we definitely have to make this video. He says, well, I'm going to have op sessions in about 6 months when the annual or once every 2 years, operating. It was Bay Rail or Pro Rail that comes to the Bay Area. As an operator, you probably are aware of both of those things. But anyway, so he was going to be open for that several months later. And that's when we ended up shooting his layout. And it's kind of a funny story. It was all planned, very prepared. He had everything he wanted to talk about, all in order, ready to go. We shot the whole thing, and I didn't know him that well at the time, or this wouldn't have happened. I did not take all my lights with me and shoot it with lights. I thought it's well lit enough in here to shoot the way it is. Shot the whole thing, took most of the day, because it takes 4 to 6 or maybe 8 hours, depending on the layout. And I went home that very same night, and I was up until 3 a.m. or later putting it all together. It's like, 'cause I was so excited with such a great layout. I'd never seen anything quite like it before. And I got it all put together, and I wasn't really happy with it. It just didn't look as good as it did in person. So I put together kind of a sample video for him to look at. And I sent it to him a couple of days later. I'm like, here, Mr. Burgess, I don't think I called him that, but here, take a look at this and see what you think. And I called him and I said, I really am not happy. I think it could be better. And he says, yeah, I agree. There are some parts that didn't look that great, or he was being all diplomatic about it.
Yeah. And
I said, Jack, I'm trying to be respectful of your time, because you're, this busy guy, you write all these articles and all this stuff. And I just don't want to impose on your time, but I would love to be able to come back with my lights and shoot it all over again. But I don't want to impose on your time. He says to me, I'm retired, which, it's like, yeah, I mean, do it. So I went back again and shot for another whole day. And I think we might have even used the original audio, the narration, with just some minor stuff fixed here and there just to make it better on the second shoot. So there's actually 2 Jack Burgess layout videos, one that no one's ever going to see, but it's on my archive somewhere, and then the one that's been published. But I think more importantly, Ray, I think that experience for him made him realize that I'm as much of a perfectionist when it comes to video as he is when it comes to modeling. Yeah. And I think that really resonated with him. I've never really asked him directly, because it was after that when I kind of approached him and I was like, would you be interested in doing like how-to videos or videos about how to build stuff, or like what you did to make your layout? And that's how the model railroading with Jack Burgess series started. It was a couple years later after the layout video. He called me back. It's like, I was thinking about doing that. And what do you think about just shooting one and see how it goes? And we did. And it was just, we've become good friends. And he and his wife are both really great people. And if it's one of the great things really, Ray, about people in the hobby is you see someone who's done so much and really is kind of a pioneer when it comes to model railroading, in the sense that I don't think anybody has ever really thought about taking their model railroading to the extreme that Jack Burgess has when it comes to modeling a prototype with such fidelity, as it's really a scaled down museum piece of what was really there.
Right.
I don't know, right? I don't know how familiar you are with his layout, but he won't build something unless he has something concrete to base it off of. And he also wrote the book about the Yosemite Valley Railroad. It's called Trains to Yosemite. And in researching the book, he got blueprints for stations and all this amazing research material. And we cover all this stuff on the series on my YouTube channel, Model Railroading with Jack Burgess. He talks about research and scratch building and just weathering and approaches to all of this stuff. I don't know where I'm going with this.
But no, I think you're hitting on that. The, guys like Jack that, you consider the greats. And I think part of what makes them great is their willingness to share.
I think so,
their willingness to put that out there.
Yeah.
It's not like, hey, I know the secret recipe, 11 herbs and spices, but I'm not going to tell you the whole thing. They put the whole thing out there and, say, hey, you can do it too. And I think there's a power and a beauty to that, as far as who the person is and how great they really are, hinged on their willingness and ability to share what they've learned with others and try to take the next person to the next step. So,
sure.
And it's really great. You're able to take a media, which is, through the video, and bring Jack to the masses, which is really cool via your YouTube channel.
I think it would be really great if people haven't watched that series, Model Railroading with Jack Burgess, to look it up, because there's so much, I want to call it headiness to his approach. And what I mean by that is he doesn't just do something to do it. He does something with such purpose and so intentionally. And he jokes and says his middle name starts with A, and he says it stands for accuracy.
There you go.
And he really owns that, it's like, so he does stuff that you don't have to guess, that why he did it. If you ask him, he'll tell you, and it will make so much sense. It's like, well, of course you did it that way. That's the only thing that makes so much sense, the way you just explained it, right?
He's in touch with his why. He knows absolutely. Why, very much so. And it's an important piece. We talk about it with Lance Minheim, and, that's a point he drives, a point, your why. And it's so great when Jack Burgess is the guy that knows his why. And going back to that video, when he allowed you to reshoot it, it's no surprise to me, because it's kind of like the model railroading version of, if you don't like it, rip it out and do it again. And
I guess
and if you have that, so basically the same thing. If you don't like what you shot in video, go back and shoot it again. If you don't like the photos you've taken, go back and retake them. It's a little tougher with shooting moving and unscheduled stuff like prototype railroading, but do it again. Go back to that same spot and try it again. Try it at a different angle. If you don't like what you did, try it again. And that's the same thing. All the principles roll over to model railroading as well. And it's great that you've done that.
It's kind of ironic when you think about it, because the first video I shot, it was what I would call good enough, right?
Yep.
But it could have been done so much better. And we both knew it. And we took the time to do it right.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that Jack talks about is nothing's good enough. It has to be right. Yep. And I know that that's kind of one of those things. And I'm not saying anything bad about people who do something until it's good enough, because frankly, I do things until they're good enough too, because there's a certain point I call the point of diminishing returns, where yes, I could keep polishing the hell out of this video, but it's not going to get better enough to make it worth the time to do it. Right. And so I'm not poo-pooing this idea of good enough, but I really think, to be honest, I really think that commitment to do it right that I had was what made him call me back and say, yes, I want to do these videos with you.
Yeah.
Because he knew that I would do it right. And so if you watch that series, you'll see it's very professionally shot. You can hear everything, you can see everything, and the explanations of what he talks about are really, really good. I think it's a really important resource for people if they're interested in hearing the whys behind the way he did stuff. So, and inspirational really for people. I mean, I would leave there thinking, oh, I could probably do this too. Won't be as good as he does because he has years and years of decades ahead of me of practice, but I could do it.
Yeah. And I think in ways you kind of owe it to him to do it right. He's put so much work into it that you owe it to do it right. And you've done such a great job. And I want to roll into some of the other layout videos that you've done. One in particular, I know I used for quite a bit of research was John Parker's BNSF Fall River Division. And you did such a wonderful job. And I mentioned this to you off air, but I'm going to say it on air. What really was neat to me, your approach to it was, and no offense, John, but I didn't hear a single word from you. It was 100% John Parker telling his story, kind of what we love to do here on the podcast. You were allowing him to do in that layout video where it wasn't, you going in and doing your interpretation. You got to hear right from the man himself of how he built his layout.
Mm-hmm. That's another guy who's very intentional about what he's built.
Right.
And frankly, Ray, I believe that if I walked into somebody's layout and appeared on camera with a microphone asking stupid questions and interrupting them and not letting them answer and telling them what I think, how offensive would that be? I mean, I don't know. To me, that would make me a very arrogant person to think that somehow I should interject myself into that guy's masterpiece of a layout.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't know. That's just not my style. I mean, if you watch those videos, I do not appear in any layout video or any video where somebody's telling their story. It just doesn't. I mean, sometimes I have to be on, like on our Talking Train show, I kind of feel like I have to be on because someone has to host it and kind of guide stuff and run all the StreamYard stuff and all that.
Right.
But if it's a layout or there's another series I do with a friend of mine named Robin, who has these very unusual things. He's an N scaler and he does weird stuff. Like he has a McKean car and he has a Pacific Electric steeple cab in N scale.
Wow.
Just these weird models. And I don't interject myself into the videos I do with him either, where he's showing off his models. Now, behind the scenes, or if you want to call it behind the camera, if somebody like Jack or someone at a layout like John Parker, if they say something that sounds interesting to me, I may say, because, we have one day and you can't get the whole story from the person in a day and then shoot the video in addition to that.
Right. So
I'll hear something and I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head that was with John Parker. And I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but I will hear hear him say something and I'll say, tell me about that. And they'll tell me a little bit more. And in many cases, I'll say, oh, like I start to understand. And I will say, that's probably interesting to the viewers because they'll be wondering about this.
Yeah.
And you just said something that really explains it. And I think knowing why just for example, why you're using that operating scheme, or maybe say like really clearly that you built the layout so that all your friends can come operate on it because you really like to watch them operate. You like to have this creation come to life. That kind of stuff, I think sometimes people don't really think of it that way, but I know, I'm trying to think of how to put this, right? I know enough to ask those kind of questions because I'm green enough to still have the beginner in me.
Yeah.
But I know enough to ask the questions because I have a little bit deeper understanding probably than I let on with a lot of things. But that's my trick. That's my superpower.
It sounds familiar for sure. You're a guide in their story, and I think that's the key part. And you figured that out. I try to do that and practice what I preach, that you're not the hero, you're the guide, and you do a great job with those videos. You're just the guide, and the hero is the layout owner, the one that created this masterpiece that you're able to share with the masses. And that's such a great approach to take, and the right one, because people want to hear from them. They want to hear their story, and just an outstanding job with that. Your YouTube channel, I was checking it out earlier, 63,000 subscribers. We'll call it that, 62.9. So 63,000 subscribers, 1,600 videos. You're creating a whole bunch of content. You must be just editing like crazy. I mean, imagine if it was a mini DVs, you'd be piled. I wouldn't be able to see you on screen. It'd be piled up all around you. But you're doing not only the layout tour videos that I was talking about that I'm just so big fan of, but then you're doing some rail fanning stuff as well, still shooting the prototype. And then you have a podcast as well. And why don't you talk about your podcast a little bit and what you're up to with that?
Well, the TSG Multimedia podcast has been around since 2010. Which I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's the longest continuously running podcast. And it's been a lot of things, Ray. It started off as a couple guys just talking about stuff. And then it morphed into like that plus some interviews. I'd have someone who wrote a book on or stuff like that. And it's morphed all different ways. It's probably going to continue to morph as time goes on. What it has become is kind of a magazine of all the stuff that I've been doing, and I use it to let the viewers understand what kind of content is coming up in the future on the channel. Because frankly, if I go to watch the Ring of Fire and put tires onto a prototype steam engine, if I'm watching that as a viewer, I'm going to be on the lookout for that video. It's like, oh, I want to see how they did that because that's cool. And I saw it on the podcast first because when I'm out doing stuff, I take my phone. Sometimes I'll take a real camera, but usually just my phone. And I'll explain, this is where I am and this is what we're going to see today. Right. And then I'll take little snippets of it as we do it. Another one of my favorite things to do is I do a lot of operating. I'm an OPSIG guy now, right? I operate as much as I can, wherever I can, whenever I can. I love it. It's one of my favorite things. Matter of fact, I just signed up for an op session that's happening in a couple of weeks here.
Nice.
So what I like to do is I'll go on my podcast and I'll say, I'm operating at this layout today, and I ran into this problem or this thing on the layout, and I want to explain how to do it or how I'm going to do it. And maybe show people like, what I did and why I did it that way. Or here's why you do a runaround to do a facing point set out, because you can't get the thing off the back of your train into this single-ended side, that kind of thing. So I'll show it. So it's like part promotion of what's coming up. There might be some historical preservation stuff on it. There might be some cool prototype stuff. I'll go to events and cover events. Like we just had our open house at the South Bay Historical Railroad Society a couple of weeks ago, and I did a podcast segment about it. It's like, here's this event. You should come to this. It's really cool. And then how-to stuff. Like here's a modeling tip. I happened to be at this guy's house today, and we were talking, and he showed me something that was really cool. Check this out. So it's like a real variety show of a lot of different stuff. And I noticed ever since I started doing that with my phone, where I take my phone with me and I do a video of what's happening at the time. And that's the segment that I put into the podcast. Ever since I started doing that, it's become way more popular on YouTube. Like this past year, not only did my current podcasts that had just come out get way more views than they've ever had before in the past, but I noticed people started watching the older ones too. And I've had like 20 and 30,000 views on old podcasts that aren't even really relevant anymore, which is just shocking to me. So that it must be doing something right.
Yeah, for sure. I called your podcast on the other one. I called it like a video journal.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you're journaling your experiences and your travels and sharing it. It's really a neat approach. I really like it. Definitely the video element and what you're doing certainly boosts that as well, because they get to see what you're doing. And that's certainly a great piece of it. So you're doing awesome with the podcast. And then obviously the TSG Live Talking Trains that you're doing. We obviously got to be a part of that. How did that get started? When did you launch that program?
Talking Trains, Ray, I think really was a product of the pandemic. Okay. Because everybody was sitting at home, and a friend of mine, Dave, do you know Sparky 107? He's on the East Coast in Canada.
Yeah.
He got me into this StreamYard live thing because he was doing something every single Wednesday for probably a couple of years. And he was kind of ramping down to focus on other things in his life. And he says, I'm trying to get people to fill in the times when I would come on Wednesdays, because his show was kind of a social gathering of people.
Yeah.
And he wanted to focus on his own life, but wanted to give them a place to go. So I said, I'll take one of your Wednesdays if you want me to. Whatever. And it started off originally as kind of a call-in talk show where I put the StreamYard link publicly so people could call in on their phone or on their webcams and talk to us. And it went like that for, I don't know, a few months. And then I think it was in 2021 or 2020, I think it was 2021. I asked Michelle Kempema if she would like to be the regular co-host on it. And she said yes. And she had been on for almost 2 years. And recently she told me she didn't want to anymore, which is fine. She's really busy and has other important things going on in her life.
For sure.
Right. But she said she'd like to come back on as a guest or a guest co-host from time to time, which I'm sure I'd love to take her up on whenever she can, because she's just a great co-host and just a great person.
One of the top assets that we have in model railroading is Michelle Kempema. And just the spirit of model railroading, just, you look that up in the dictionary and Michelle's pictures there, it's just her, her passion, her love for the hobby, and her willingness to talk to people and share with people, and her positive outlook is just absolutely phenomenal. So kudos to you to have her on the show for so long. That's super. She is a super busy person, and had her here on the podcast, and she's a lot of fun. So you've been doing some rotating, and now you got Tony Cook helping you out as a guest co-host on the past show we were on, and then he's coming up with you, as you mentioned, again on the
he's going to be our featured guest on the next one, because we're going to talk about train sets, and that's a tie-in to that whole Italian train sets. What do you have still? Yeah, I'm going to have that box here.
That's when
we do when we do that live show, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
I've actually had a lot of fun having guest co-hosts on that show, because I don't know, I guess if you have the same two people all the time, maybe it gets a little stale. I don't really think it was getting stale with me and Michelle doing it, but I also want to respect her need to focus on other things. Well, it's not like she was ever prohibited from doing other stuff by being on my show.
Right.
But I also know that it's just my show, it was our show, but it's just some stupid YouTube thing, in the grand scheme of things. So,
well, it's definitely not a stupid thing. It's one of those things. And you talk about the pandemic and these types of shows, and I participated in other things, and they got us through. Like those very challenging years, and I especially the first part of that 2020 after St. Patrick's Day, it just seemed to just right downhill. And you think about it, and I almost that you felt trapped in some ways. It was like, oh man, I'll just go, maybe I'll go to I can't go to the hobby shop. Oh, maybe I can't go there. And then you finally, it's like, well, And then this technology within a few years, I mean, the Zooms and the StreamYards and the Skypes kicked up, and the all these things that we were able to connect with each other pulled us through. I mean, I participated in non-model railroading discussions and live things and chatting with people. And it really was, it was therapy. And I'm sure it was therapy for you guys as well. You know, hey, we can't get out, but hey, we can talk to everybody. We can connect here. We can see each other, and we know that we're all okay and do that. So it was very important. It was almost vital to a lot of mental health and making it through those challenges.
Yeah. And one of the really cool things about this technology is, you know, before, even if you wanted to do a podcast, you kind of needed to have the person there. Yeah. I mean, I suppose you could talk to someone on the phone and hit a recording or something, or do it on Skype and record it that way or whatever. But prior to the pandemic, people weren't really doing that kind of thing much.
No.
Now, I mean, look at us. You're over in Connecticut. I'm way out here in California on the entirely other side of the country. And we're having this conversation where I can see you clear as day. You can hopefully, unfortunately, you can see me clear as day too. But you know, here we are talking about stuff that matters to us, thousands of miles apart. The Talking Trains show, we had people from, I think, almost every time zone. So it's a pretty cool way to bring people together.
Oh, it's an amazing way to connect, and just, the technology where I'm able to interview Paul Gasior from Sydney, Australia. And of course, he's the executive producer here, but it's just amazing. It brings everybody in. It sounds like you're here in the room with me, and it's just absolutely amazing. The technology, the advancement, and certainly makes these things possible. And boy, I just love to be able to share the hobby. And these are great ways for us to share the hobby. And we've gone an hour of sharing your story tonight. And I don't think we even got to scratch the surface of these 1,600 videos and the reviews and everything else. So I think we're going to have to get John back soon to talk a little bit more about your channel and the things that you're up to. But for now, I want to thank you, John, for coming on Around the Layout and sharing your story.
Well, and I would like to thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm honored because you have all the most important people. I'm surprised you even asked.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.